1985. It was during a blizzard that once again her father threw her out, and she met Les Crow. She was in a nightie and little else. He was a member in AA, and he had given her his phone number, and she called him for help. Les took her in his arms, convinced that love would make her well. Of course it couldn't, but it was better than being tortured by her father. One day at a woods nearby during a brisk walk, she quickly began to feel stronger, and then she bounced up feeling powerful. Look, look, my legs, I can dance, and she twirled around. Then suddenly she dropped, screaming in a rage. She crumpled in a ball in the wet snow. Soaked in grief, she sobbed. He rushed over and rocked her in his arms. He felt so helpless, so completely overwhelmed. But he loved her and was terrified she might try and commit suicide again. Me sick, something make me sick, she sobbed. He said, I know laws of nature are violent, but you shouldn't get so upset. What's making you sick? No, she shook her head. No, never. Me smell something now. Me sick. Me smell something. Les looks up at the billowing clouds of yellow sulfuric smoke streaming overhead the downtown park and says, You're right. I can't smell it because I'm a mechanic, but I see it. You're right. We have to be careful. You need to be out in the country. And he actually did. He made a little bed in his van and he took her out to the country and they had a picnic. She doesn't know where they were, but it was lovely. And slowly he introduced her to his father and took her to Manitoulin, and they went fishing. And for a while, she really started to get well. And then 5 months later, she started to have a series of attacks over and over and over again. And he couldn't deal with it. He tried, but he just couldn't. And her mother found her an apartment, and Les helped her move in. She loved those children of his. It was a little dream she had to spend her life with a lovely mechanic. She'd never have to worry about fixing her car. He was a handyman. And she loved his children. But that little dream blew up. Not for any reason by any human, but by her disease. Wally had driven her from Toronto to Sudbury and convinced her to stay in Sudbury. The back of her mind, she knew it was a mistake, a terrible mistake. Sudbury had never been good to her. She'd been rescued by so many and kept alive by some miracle, when really she just wished she could just die and get it over with. It was never going to be easy, but she stayed sober and she got very active in AA and she did what she could to help others. And she kept remembering what the police said about James Kelly and what he did to her. She sold a house and gave him $7,000. That was the last of her money. And bought her freedom. And Wally didn't want her in Toronto as much as he loved her and wanted to move her in, and we would have married her in a heartbeat. He felt that she had to get away from him. He'd find her. So he drove her to Sudbury. And from there, she was rescued by Les. And then one day, she took another attack at a church meeting. And Tom Murphy just couldn't hold her up. And that's how she met Dan McIsaac. He took her home. He thought she had wet brain. He'd worked in detox and he'd seen people take those kinds of attacks from wet brain. And because she couldn't talk and she couldn't read, and he thought she had wet brain. And he started to take turns with Tom to take care of her. And she'd shuffle around in a daze, one day from the next, traumatized, locked, memories buried in her that she could not remember almost any of the past 8 years. Only in brief flashbacks, the memories would surge from her subconscious and she would see the horror of it. And she could see her family and friends and even her mother had witnessed James the Beast and his brutal attacks on her, and yet they ignored it. And they ignored her, and no one tried to rescue her. Agony of denial would lose the memory as trauma strikes most defenseless victims. From that day on, furthermore, Trudy would seldom remember even who she was. She never recovered becoming trapped by victim behavior, which meant that what everyone told her, it had been all her fault, and somehow it became her truth. Yet not so. Only in subconscious nightmares could she see the truth. That awake was too painful for her to recall. Hundreds had watched her agony throughout all those decades without even the slightest pity.